This is the Alpha Human Podcast, and I am your host, Lawrence Rosenberg. Our guest today is Dale Comstock, a man who has spent 35 years combating America's enemies as a Green Beret and as a Delta Force operator, and as a mercenary targeting high-value terrorists, their leaders, and financiers. He has been decorated twice for valor in combat and has been at the tip of the spear in every conflict where America's special forces have been deployed, from Grenada and the invasion of Panama, where Dale and his team raided Modelo Prison to rescue American hostage Kurt Muse, through to the wars in Iraq, Afghanistan, and beyond. Dale also holds black belts in Jiu-Jitsu, American Open Karate, and extension fighting, and is a former professional boxer and MMA fighter, as well as competitive bodybuilder. And he has been featured in the NBC TV series Stars Earn Stripes and Discovery Channel's One Man Army. Dale is also the author of American Badass, the true story of a modern-day Spartan. Dale, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me on the show, Lawrence. Appreciate it.
It's my pleasure. It's my pleasure. So you're over in Bali right now. So you're in Indonesia. Listen, thanks for doing the show. I know it's super early for you. What in God's name are you doing in Indonesia?
Well, I actually live here. So I have a company here, security company in Bali. And so I do security work here. I live here. I have a wife here, family here. I also have a home in Florida, and I have family there. So I maintain a home in Florida for my daughter. She's 11 years old. And so I maintain that for her and I when I go back, and then I have a home here. So that's what I'm doing in Bali. Living the dream, wake up every day and, in paradise, working. If you want to call it work, it's not even work, because my security company specializes in explosive detector dogs, narcotic dogs, and patrol attack dogs. And I provide security for like the Marriott properties, hotels, and the local venues. So I've been training dogs for 45 years. And so, basically I've turned a hobby into a job. And if you want to call it a job. So I wake up every day to play with my dogs and make money from them and live in Bali. How cool is that?
That's amazing. I got to say, I read the book, and I mean, it's a whirlwind of a book, and there's so much. You've done so much. I mean, I don't even think I got through your entire bio, and there's so much in it. I had to cut it short. I mean, you're a bit of an overachiever.
Well, a bit. I'm actually a high achiever, not an overachiever.
Gotcha. High achiever, definitely a high achiever. So I want to kind of jump in with the title of the book itself, because you see yourself as a modern day Spartan. You're wearing the shirt. You got the Spartan shirt on.
Yes, I do.
So you see yourself as this true to life Spartan in the modern era. How is that? How so? How are you a modern day Spartan?
Well, I think most people have seen the movie 300, and the Spartans and that whole history behind it. But it's easy to be a soldier, I guess, to some degree. But I look at myself as more than that, because in my military career, I was a long-range reconnaissance scout in 82nd Airborne Division. I was an infantry guy. I was a Green Beret. I was a Delta Force operator. I worked for OGA for 9.5 years, doing the same thing I did in the military, with a lot less Americans by my side, more indigenous, but doing the same dangerous type of work. Mm-hmm. And I actually took it to another level. I actually have worked as, besides a security contractor per se, I've also worked as, people kind of frown when you say mercenary, but the reality is I worked as a mercenary. I was a soldier for hire for foreign governments, foreign friendly governments. And I want to clarify that. So, because I know people start rolling their eyes and go, oh my God, that's illegal and blah, blah, blah. No, actually it's not illegal. work as a mercenary for a foreign friendly country as long as that country is friendly to the United States and in aligned with them. So, you know, so I've done that kind of work, which I thought to me was being the, you know, when I was in the Army, everybody looked at, you know, Green Beret as the next level, and then every Green Beret out there thought, man, you know, I've heard the term the final frontier to be a Delta Force operator, because, you know, it was, you know, that was the ceiling, and there was only so many guys that could make it there, and you know, that was again the final frontier. And then after I got there, I heard that after that, working for, you know, the other government agency, there was an element in that if that was the final frontier. And it was to some degree, because it was even more difficult than getting into Delta. And then I realized there's actually one more final frontier. It's the ultimate, I don't know if this is a good term to use, but warriorhood, if you will, and that was being a mercenary. So I say that because in the military, in the government, the people I worked for, you had topside support, you had backside support, you had, you know, what we call big mill, the big military to come in and back you up. You got in trouble, you had, you know, medical, air support. Whereas a mercenary, at least in my case, you don't have anything but what you bring to the fight or what you can buy off the black market and use. And so, to me, there was no air support, there was no medical support, there was no QRF that was going to come and get you out if you were in trouble. You were out there on your own. It was mano a mano, you and the bad guy, basically the same equipment, whatever it was, no matter how primitive it was. And it came down to, you know, your warrior skills. Who had the better skills? Who was the better strategist? Who was more tenacious in battle? That was who's going to win. So, to me, I thought that was the final frontier. You know, do away with all the high speed equipment. You know, and go to combat with just the basics that the most elementary, you know, fighters out there would have. Go to war with them with that, and let your skills be the the determining factor of of the win or the lose in the battle. You know, so that's to me was the ultimate the final frontier, and I felt like that was about as close as it got to being a Spartan or a gladiator. So it really came down to your physical prowess, your mental prowess, your skill sets compared to the other man. And when I say the other man, in case of being a mercenary, I'm talking about terrorists. I didn't go to war with soldiers. I let soldiers go to war with soldiers, but my job was to go after terrorists. High value targets. The guys that were financing, terrorism. The high level guys that needed to get spanked. And
right.
So, to me, that again, like I said, that was to me what I thought was, the ultimate, warriorhood. That was to me being the Spartan. That was being like a gladiator. So to me, that was the final test of my skills. Could I do that? And so that's kind of how I define it, why I define it that way. And actually, the moniker was kind of assigned to me by Senator Allen West. He's a good friend of mine, and he was one of the guys that endorsed my book. And if you read his, his endorsement on the back, he mentions that, he considered me an American Spartan. So modern-day warrior, modern-day Spartan. It's kind of cool.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And just to clarify with some of the acronyms for my audience, I know when we say OGA, other government agency, and again, you don't have to attest to this, but I'm assuming that means CIA.
The alphabet company.
The alphabet soup. But with that said, I want to quote you from your book. So you say that it wasn't about killing the enemy. It was about protecting Americans from the wolf at the door, doing the heavy lifting, cleaning up the mess that for most was too hard to stomach. And it was a privilege to stand between them and death. So when you talk about Dale protecting Americans from the wolf at the door, where did all that start? It would be great to hear your story about why you joined the military in the first place, and then why you embarked on becoming a part of the U.S. Army Special Forces, Green Berets, then of course, Delta Force, AKA the unit.
Yeah, so I remember it was a while back. My mom asked me one day, you know, she knew what I was doing, and she asked me, she said, you know, why are you doing this? You know, because I was married, I had kids, you know, and here I am going down range on a regular basis for very long periods of time. Nobody knew where I was at. A lot of times you never heard from me again for a long time. And for her, that was very concerning. It's like, you know, you're a married man, you have children, you know, the responsibilities are to them, you know, so why are you doing this? And I remember I looked at her and I thought about it for a second. I go, well, Mom, if I don't do it, who will? Right? And it's not like people are lining up to do this kind of work, you know, especially men with wives and kids, you know, and a lot of the younger guys don't have that. They don't have that experience, you know, to do this kind of stuff. So that was my answer. But what kind of brought me into this profession, I was actually born into it. So my father was in the Army for 20 years, and I grew up in the military culture. I was raised, you know, all across the country. Spent most of my childhood raised in Germany. My mother's German. So, you know, I was raised there with my German family and my American, you know, and of course my family. And it was a natural fit. You know, the military culture is different from the civilian culture. Very different, at least it was in my era coming up. And, you know, I felt comfortable there. I like the whole warrior thing. You know, I watched my dad go, you know, he went to Vietnam, and I watched him go to the field with his Army gear, you know, the old, you know, steel pot, the old, you know, LBE, LCE, and, you know, and for a young, impressionable boy, you know, to see that was, wow, you know, I want to be like that, you know, I want to wear the helmet and play with the guns. And so my friends and I growing up would play Army all the time, man. It was a huge pastime, you know. You know, it was just amazing. You know, when I look back at my childhood, you know, we'd be out there for hours all day and at night, you know, and having little wars and skirmishes, you know, and wearing our dad's equipment, you know, because when our dads weren't in the field, you know, they had all their gear at home, and we'd wear their gear, you know, canteens and helmets and stuff. And so it was you know, I love that stuff, you know, and I missed it as I got a little bit older, because when my dad retired, I was 16, and we moved to, of all places, San Francisco, Fremont, you know, Fremont, California, the Bay Area. And for a kid that was spent his entire life growing up in a military culture, and suddenly you're in Fremont, California, San Francisco, I was like a fish out of water. You know, the kids were different. You know, they were, I mean, the whole mindset was different than a child that was reared in the military culture. You know, there's a different type of discipline. You know, in the military culture, there's a commonality. We all recognize that and know that, even though it may not be spoken. We know that all our fathers were soldiers, you know, and we were in this, you know, in a military school, so to speak. And so when I was outside of that, it just didn't feel right. It just did not feel right. I was very uncomfortable. I had no friends, absolutely zero friends. I remember for some reason, I just couldn't make friends. And it was very weird, very weird. I became very isolated, very almost introverted, you know, and I spent a lot of time just lifting weights and working out, you know, and doing my thing, you know, because I had no one else to hang out with. And it was at some point I realized, man, I have got to go back to the old way, you know, of living, which is the military. And so my father, on my mother's side and my father's side, nobody had a college education. In fact, my dad had an 11th grade education. My mom had a 9th grade education. And I was supposed to be the one that goes to college, you know, the first. And was my dad's dream, you know, to see his son go to college. And I knew that. And to be honest with you, I was a piss poor student. You know, I didn't do well in school. The reason I didn't do well in school is because I moved around a lot in high school. Because my, the military. I went in 4 years. I went to 4 different high schools, and usually changed high schools in the middle of the year. And so, that was very problematic. I had a hard time assimilating fast enough and getting back into the groove of things and keep my grades up. So I was like just barely making D's. I was a D, F student on a good day. I might have got a C, but I was just had a hard time. And so school did not appeal to me anymore. And so I didn't even tell my dad about it, but one day I just snuck down to a recruiter's office. I knew what I wanted to do, and I enlisted to be a Ranger. And then when I told him what I had done, I could tell in his eyes he was very disappointed. I broke his heart. And so I made the promise to him. I said, well, I can't undo the enlistment. I'm signed up. I'm on my way in, Dad. I said, but I'll promise to get my college degree. It's still check that block. And so. And that's what I did. So I went into the Army. I did get my bachelor's degree. I got my master's degree while I was in the Army. I got my doctorate thereafter, and which was not an easy feat when you consider my entire military career. I was spent in the infantry, the LRRPs, 82nd. I was a Green Beret. I was a Delta Force operator. It's not like I had a 9-to-5 job. I spent years and years and years downrange in the jungles and the deserts. And so in order for me to fit in all that schooling means I had to sacrifice something, which was my personal time. I made it a point not to sacrifice my family time when I was home. So I had to carve out more time during the day or the night to do my studies. And that meant, getting up at 1 o'clock in the morning, burning the midnight oil and studying. That's what I had to do. If it meant, instead of going to lunch, going into the corner somewhere and reading my books, that's what I had to do. So, and anyway, so that was kind of how I got into the military. My reasoning behind it was really a passion for a certain type of lifestyle that I have yet to find in the military, in the civilian world. Even now, it's a big adjustment for a lot of veterans to get out of the military. If they spend any significant time in the military, get out and immerse themselves in the civilian world. It's really awkward. And it's actually very frustrating because, honestly, the civilian world works very slow compared to the military. It's amazing that we've made this much progress in our history at the rate that we work, and I'm like, man, we could have achieved so much more if everybody had a military mindset, the same work ethics. The military, if you're told to do something, it wasn't like, yeah, I'll get back to you in 2 weeks. It was like, it's done right now, and, whatever it takes, I'll get it done right now. That's how we operate in the military. In the civilian world, it's like it takes everybody forever to make a decision, and then they got to have all these, boards and, and panels to study the problem and figure out the solutions, like, what the hell, I'm just asking you to go down and buy some, supplies, some paper supplies for the printer. Why is that going to be such a major operation? So anyways, big difference. And, but, at some point you can't be a soldier forever. Although I try to be a soldier forever. My last real combat deployment was in 2015, 2016 in Yemen. Okay. And, I enlisted in the Army in 1981. So I've been going at it for a long time. And, the reality is that lifestyle is so ingrained in me. I have such a lust for it that anytime I'm given the opportunity to go back down range and, call it trigger time, I'm more than happy to jump on that bandwagon and go, knowing how risky it is. Because it's just one of those things you just got to keep going back to the well and take a drink, and I'm sure one of these days I might fall in that well if I'm not careful, but I'm getting a little older and, my priorities are starting to change. I'm focusing more on my business development, and my family, my children, and more importantly, I'm just focusing now on just being happy, man, and I'm not to say I wasn't happy before, but now it's like, I get to get up when I wake up when I want to wake up. I go to bed when I want to go to bed. I have a lot more freedom, and I'm not constrained by the mission. I'm not constrained by, the leadership, what they need me to do. It's like I am the leadership. I do what I do when I do it. So,
right. Listen, you know, a lot of people would say that you're living the dream, especially doing what you're doing in Bali. But the passion you had, you know, must have been fully expressed when you when you were in the unit, when you were in Delta Force. And I wanted to ask you a little bit about that. I'm gonna quote you from the book. You say that Delta selection is an individual effort. Soldiers are given very limited but specific instructions to perform for days on end in austere conditions. The physiological challenge, the isolation, wears down their will to win. The psychological and emotional head games that they play are theirs alone, manifested from their own fears and doubts. The attrition rate is the highest in the military, and the chances of success are unlikely, even for the most physically and mentally adept. So, what differentiates Delta Force or the unit from all the rest of special forces or SOF? You know, what is it about the unit that is just so much harder, so much more esteemed? I think you're called a tier 1 operator.
Yeah. So if you look at, you know, for example, the SEALs, right? They have bullets training. You look at Ranger School, you have Special Forces. You look at all these other military units, and when you go through the selection process, you go through as a group. Okay.
Okay.
The guys running down the street, you know, the beach in a group, carrying logs, you know, and getting wet and rolling around the sand, right? So, so imagine in that type of scenario, you could be weak, right? But you're getting help from the rest of the guys that carry the log, for example, right? Or, you know, you become empowered when you see other guys to your left and right, you know, giving it their all. It's like, yeah, I'm going to give my all too, because, you know, they're doing it. So you kind of bleed a little bit of the energy from everybody else to keep you going, right? It's easy to hide among the crowd, right? Eventually, you know, the cadre, you know, they'll single you out, they'll pick you out, you know, and hopefully weed you out of the group. But you can make it through, you know, some camouflage, so to speak. I've seen it happen in the Q course for Special Forces, where guys that had no business being in Special Forces were able to basically remain in the shadows on the backside, you know, keep under the radar and kind of squeak through, knowing that, you know, they really weren't there for the right reasons, and nor did they deserve to be there because of their attitude. So, so the difference is with the Delta selection program, you don't go through as a group. Okay, there's no team effort. There's no group events. Everything's an individual effort. Okay, so you're isolated. You're given very limited instruction. You're told basically, you know, what to do, but not how to do it or how fast to do it. You don't know what the minimum standards are. You're just told do the best you can. So when you look at the cadre and you go, if you ask them, well, how much time do I have, sir? Do the best you can. Okay, what does that mean? And so you basically go through the entire selection course. And by the way, the cadre, because I was a cadre also for about three different courses, classes, and cadre is very stone-faced, right? There's no emotion. There's no discourse. It's very direct. And not only that, you're not even acknowledged by your name. You're assigned a color and number, right? So you know you are basically Mr. Anonymous among all the other anonymous people, and when they're addressing you, there's no smiling, there's no scowling, there's nothing. It's just stone face. Very specific instructions. Do the best you can. Well, that's it. Do the best you can. You know, but do the best you can. Like, okay, shit. And so you go, right, and you do the best you can. And you don't know what the best is, right? You don't know if it's good enough. And so what happens is when you do this day in and day out, day in, night, and you're doing the best you can in your mind is go as hard and fast as you can and hope that it's more than the minimum. And so that kind of pressure physiologically will wear you down. And so what happens is as your body starts to break down, okay, then the psychology steps, comes in, and that is the self-doubt, and when your body starts going out, it has a mental, it's almost draining mentally on you. It's debilitating. You start to doubt yourself. You start getting emotional. All these questions start going through your head, and then you ask yourself, why am I doing this? Why am I hurting myself? And so all these emotions come to play, and basically what they're doing is they're letting you break yourself down physically. They're not breaking you down. You're breaking yourself down. If you want it bad enough, you're going to do the best you can, and in that process of doing the best you can, you're going to physically start destroying yourself. And when that happens, your mind starts to go behind it. And so you get to a point where your body is useless. And basically the only reason it's still functioning is because the willpower in your mind is telling you to keep going. Pick one leg up, put it in front of the other one, just keep going, just keep going, just keep going. And then you start having these conversations, actually you start really having a conversation out loud with yourself,
Wow.
God, why am I doing this? Come on, man. Is it really worth it? And you start, am I, God, am I a sissy, or, I got this, you start, all this stuff starts going through your head, and every day becomes an emotional play for you. And with every other day, it gets worse and worse and worse. And then before you know it, you're this, you're this walking psychotic, maniacal creature that, it's like, you're almost like a zombie, And so therein is the stress. Stress is what you put on yourself. Does it work? Hell yeah. I can tell you right now, I don't care how big and bad and how mentally tough you think you are, it will break you down. And I'll put it in perspective for numbers. So selection is run twice a year. They canvass the entire military looking for applicants, right? And you have to meet certain requirements, certain minimum requirements. And so if you can meet all those minimum requirements, they send you a letter saying, hey, you met all the minimum requirements to apply. Okay, just apply, put some paperwork in and apply. Like, oh, okay. So then you apply, and then you go through another vetting process. They look at your application and go, yes, no. Okay, you're allowed to now come to the next phase of it, which is psychological evaluation, written psychological evaluation, physical fitness test, background checks, a lot of questions, right? And so you got to get through that gate. If you're lucky and you get through that gate, then you get orders to go to the actual selection process, assessment selection process, right? So wow, it's like when does the selection end? I'll tell you when the selection ends. It never ends. Okay, those were the words given to me by my command sergeant major when I finally made it to the squadron. I reported in proudly. He looked at me and he's, congratulations, you're one of the few guys that made it here. He goes, but I want to remind you, he goes, selection's a continuous process. Just because you're here don't mean you're in forever. He goes, when you can't give 100% every day, you're out of here. Like, damn, so then you go through the assessment selection course. That's the part that's the long, the long walk, so to speak, and it's the part that's going to make you or break you. And so this is done twice a year. In my particular class, and I think it was an anomaly, there were, I believe if I remember right, there were about 110 candidates. Of the 110, 6 of us completed the course. The 6 that completed the course, 3 of us were selected. At that time, I was the youngest guy to ever be selected at the age of 23.
Okay.
Most guys were about 33 that made it through the course. They had a lot more experience than I did. So I had 4 years in the Army. I was out of the 82nd Airborne Division. I just knew how to carry heavy things on my back and dig holes just to fill them back up.
Right.
I was married. I had a little baby girl. And I certainly didn't have the military experience that a lot of these other guys had. But I did have the heart to make it. And so and there I was. And that's how I got through that whole process. So by far, I would tell you, I've been through the Q course selection process, all that. And again, it's a lot easier when you're going through with a group of guys. Yeah, you still have to do the work, but it's a lot easier to hide hide in the crowd, and be that gray man in there sometimes and passing things. So so Delta selection is, I will argue that it is by far the hardest selection process in the world. Just look at the numbers, the attrition rate, how high it is, the selection process, and people ask, what kind of man does the unit select? You just got to be tough. You got to be able to walk a long way. That kind of stuff. No. In fact, Delta Force doesn't select the best man. They select the right man, and that's the difference. The right man. You go to SEALs and everything else. It's the best guy, the guy that meets all those minimum standards, can run the fastest, jump the highest, swim the longest. But Delta, it's not really about how physically fit you are. It's how mentally fit you are. Can you operate unilaterally? Can you go out and represent the United States Army? Can you stand in front of congressmen and generals and make very important decisions as a buck sergeant in the Delta Force, right? That's what they're looking for. They're looking for a guy as we termed him, a thinker who's a shooter. Not a shooter who's a thinker who's a shooter, right? And so that's the, again, difference. It's the right guy, with above average IQs, the right guy that can make mature, professional, responsible decisions, the guy that can do the right thing when nobody's looking.
Wow. And Dale, is that kind of training and selection process geared the way it is because Delta operators will be sent out, maybe on their own, or in a lot of instances with very little support and not as a team potentially, whereas the other, whether you're the Rangers or the SEALs, you're going out on a bigger mission with a bigger group?
Yeah. So as a Delta Force operator, you're expected to operate unilaterally as well as a team. And here's the other thing about what is an operator. So that term, it's been around before Delta. It was used for like OSS, which was the original origins of special forces, but nobody in the military was considered an operator. Right now that term has been hijacked by everybody. I even know cops that call themselves operators. Like, what? And so, but they don't know why. They're called an operator. Right now, you're a SEAL operator. You're a Green Beret operator. You're a Ranger operator. You're a truck driver operator. But an operator, reason we were operators is because, we worked in different guises, so to speak. Today I might be a soldier. Tomorrow I might be working as a civilian. Next week I'm working I'm working for another government agency as one of theirs, right? So I wore different hats. And so I wasn't always a soldier per se. And so what do you call a guy like that, If you're not a soldier today, well, then you're an operative or an operator, right? So the agency, the term is, more appropriately called operative. But in the unit, it was operator. And the reason it was that way as well, because actually probably more importantly, is because of the promotion situation, right? So if I was a Green Beret, but I was a Delta Force operator, and then it was time for me to get promoted, and the promotion board came up, I'm competing against other Green Berets, right, that are not in Delta. And so how do I distinguish myself from those guys, right? Because I'm doing a different job. They're doing a different job for me, but we're being evaluated by the same Special Forces Board, right? So a Special Forces Board has to understand that, yeah, this guy's an operator. His mission, what he does is different from his peer group over here in the Green Berets, right? So there has to be a discriminator as well. So that's where that term came from. But it sounds really cool, and people just started like adopting it. Like, yeah, I'm an operator too. I'm special. I'm high speed. I'm just high speed as those guys. Wow, I've had Marines contact me, and throw me under the bus because they were operators. Like, really, you're a Marine operator? Like, what does that mean? You're like a boat driver? Right. But everybody wants to be special, but nobody wants to put, they don't want to pay the dues. And unfortunately, that is something that's very, very common. In fact, it was one of the reasons I got out of the Army in 2001 is I saw this whole, I remember his name was General Shinseki. He came to a ceremony on Fort Bragg at USASOC, and there was a bunch of Green Berets in formation, and he was not a Green Beret. In fact, he had a tanker's background, and he shows up and he sees all these Green Berets. Like, wow, he was really impressed with the Green Berets, right? Now, the Green Beret was actually awarded to Special Forces by Kennedy, John Kennedy.
Right.
And so to distinguish, these men and what their mission was, right? Because it was held in very high esteem. I think going all the way back to, actually going all the way back to World War II, but particularly Vietnam. And he was so impressed with that. Right there on the spot, he made a command and said, I want everybody in the Army to wear Green Berets. Everybody. Not Green Berets, but Berets, right? And so what did he do? He hijacked the black beret from the Rangers, put everybody in black berets, which was really a kick in the balls because they owned that black beret, right? That distinguished them, right? That black beret was something that it was a trophy that a lot of guys wanted, and he tried for that to go to Ranger School. He just took it from him and he plopped it on everybody's head in the Army. Every cook, every clerk, everybody out there got to feel special. You get to feel like a Ranger. You get to wear the black beret. Wow. And I thought about that. I was like, wow, what's the point of that? And the point was he wanted everybody to feel good about it. He wanted to raise their esteem, to wear a black beret in the Army. And so, it was a real slap in the face to Special Forces, Special Operations, Rangers, and I started seeing a lot more of this creeping in. It was, it was no longer about substance as much as it was about image. And the Army was going through a transition at that time that I did not like. Standards were being lowered or thrown completely out to accommodate everybody. In fact, I had guys come into my unit from basic training that didn't have to pass the PT test, physical fitness test, and basic training. I was like, well, if you fail, no big deal. When you get to your unit, they'll train you, get you up to speed. I had guys coming to my Special Forces team. They couldn't swim. They threw out the swim requirements because certain people can't swim that well. Wow. And it wanted to be more inclusive. So I had guys knocking on my team door going, hey, Sergeant Comstock, can you swim? No, I had a water team. It's like when you show up to my team, you should know how to swim because we might actually go on a mission tomorrow. And I need everybody to be able to swim. And you're telling me you can't swim? I got to take you to the pool and teach you how to swim? That ain't like something you teach somebody overnight, right? And so it was that mindset that was creeping in that was really, really starting to, get very disgusting. In fact, I remember even the combatives hand-to-hand program, there's a ban on any kind of combatives, I couldn't compete in any, even though I did, I actually boxed professionally when I was in the Army. But there was a ban that came down, you're the quiet professional, you shouldn't be fighting, fist fights and this and that and participating in MMA fights and, it's a sport, right? Because they wanted the quiet professional, they wanted the executive Green Beret, the guy that shows up in a suit with Green Beret, and it was like, it made no sense. Why are you watering this thing down? Because we want to make it all inclusive. We want to build everybody. And I just had enough of that, and I put my paperwork in, so I'm out of here, So things, ebbs and flows, just depends on who's in charge. Then the wars happened and everybody kind of got reoriented again in the right direction for a minute. And then certain leadership came into office and decided that everybody should be allowed in the military. And, again, I almost feel like it was a conspiracy to demoralize the military and actually dilute its capability for really social and political reasons. And I mean, I can go on all day about that, and I'll probably piss a lot of people off if I give my true opinion here. But there's just some things that you just don't screw with. If it's working, don't fix it, right? If it's not broke, don't fix it. And there's this mindset out there, well, let's just break it, and then let's just run it like it's broken. So what? Anyways, I ramble, but
no, it's fascinating. you could see, I would have never thought that what was going on in the culture at large at the time, which I know you're alluding to, which is that whole mindset of everyone deserves a trophy, and how that whole mindset was starting to infect civilian life. I had no idea that it was penetrating the elite level
Yeah,
within the warrior class, and that's shocking.
yeah. Think
Absolutely.
about this. Think about this. So, look, I spent a lot of time in the infantry and special forces, obviously. And I can tell you demographically, at least during my era, I would say 99.999% of all the members in those organizations were conservative, were, they believed in the American Constitution. They were true blue Americans. They were like me. They grew up playing Army, believing in John Wayne, believing in patriotism and, fighting communism, all those things. And those are the kind of men that go to those kind of groups, right? And it's not always white guys either. Actually, there's quite a few Hispanics in those organizations, and there were black guys, not as many, but they were there. Those that kind of thought the same way. But then it came along, the whole idea. Let's put women in combat units, and then my problem with that was. And I've been with women in the field, and it was a train wreck. Every time it's a train wreck. Every time, because the reality is this. You know what? Men do what men do. Women do what women do. I don't care how professional you think you are. At some point, especially under stress, under certain circumstances, things start to devolve, right? And then, and we go back to a lot of our primal ways. I've had women say, well, men should just keep their tool in their pants, It's like, well, you know what? It's not just men. Women are just as promiscuous as men. I've seen it happen down there. I've seen some really weird stuff happen, and I've seen a lot of people lose their careers over things that would have never happened had they not integrated. And everybody's like, well, they deserve a chance too. Well, you can't tell me, especially the feminists, you can't tell me that feminism, women are not equal to men, but on the other hand, you want to be equal to men. You are equal to men. I'm like, which one is it? Because you know what? In the infantry, for example, imagine this: you got an 11-man rifle squad, 11 guys, same cut of cloth, same mindset. Will die for each other. They'll die for this flag and what they believe in. They'll, that's the kind of men we have out there, soldiers. And all of a sudden, you start throwing in some, some liberal think, right? It comes into this thing. And before you know it, it's when you're told, go attack that bunker and take it out, before you know it, now you have a debate. Well, can't we just negotiate with them? Maybe we just go around them and go somewhere else. You can't have that, man. You gotta have unity, unity in your think, unity in your mission, conformity in the process. There's gotta be your one mind, your one collective that works together to the same objective. As soon as you start introducing conflicting thoughts, motivations, and reasons for their existence in that organization, it starts to unravel. I've seen it personally. I've seen it happen, and I'm like, Christ Jiminy, man. I had an incident one time, kind of funny actually. So I ended up working in what we call the Group S3 shop. It was the operations shop. The only time I ever had a desk job in the Army for a year and a half. For 20 years, it was the only time that I, got to kind of chill my jets a little bit. I had an office job, so to speak. And in my office, I had different MOSs, right? Guys that were, they were ammunition experts, right? They ordered all the ammunition. I had other guys that were focusing on, whatever, communications gear. I had other guys that I had a woman, a buck sergeant, and she was an illustrator, right? All she did was make PowerPoint presentations for the commander. That was her job, right? And then I had this private that just came in who wasn't, at the time, he wasn't too sharp, man. He actually turned out to be a good soldier later in life. But at the time, he was just really, really confused as to what he was supposed to do and why he was there. And I remember I was constantly, he was like sad sack, as his non-commissioned officer. I'm constantly in his ass trying to get him to do the right thing, and You know, I had to constantly babysit this guy, so he didn't get in trouble, and I didn't get in trouble because he's getting in trouble, right? So, and like we always had to wear a badge, right? Because where we worked, we had to, you know, have a badge to get in. He'd always forget his badge, you know. I'm like, Jesus Christ, you know. And it was always one of those things. Well, I remember one day he broke a big rule, and the rule was you never put a military weapon in a privately owned vehicle. And we were drawing weapons from the arms room, which was around the corner, and we were going to go do, I think, a parachute jump with the weapons. And so he leaves the arm room, gets in his car with his M16 or M4 at the time, and he drives off with it around back to the unit. And somebody saw him. Well, dude, that's the kiss of death, man. That is Article 15. You know, that's an Article 15 violation, right? So before he even got to the office, I already got the phone call, you know, Private Clarkson, you know, he, oh God, you know, here we go, right? So, and it's pretty severe, right? Weapons accountability is a big, big deal, man. Big deal in the military. You lose a weapon anywhere at any time, man, everything stops. Everything stops in place until that weapon is located. And so by the time he got to the office, I was waiting for him, and I just had to, you know, on one hand, I'm just shaking my head going, geez, what am I going to do with this guy, you know? And I decided, well, if you're going to be dumb, I'll make you strong. So you know, get down and start doing push-ups, right? I'm going to make you push-ups, do push-ups till you puke, you know? And this butt sergeant, she saw what was going on, and I was within my right, you know, I could have done worse with the guy. I could have wrote him up in Article 15, you know. I could have taken his money. I could have, you know, taken away whatever rank you already had, which wasn't anything at all. I opted, you know, well, let's just do the physical fitness part of this exercise. So, and she lost her mind, right? Oh my God, that's so cruel, you know, blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, this is another non-commissioned officer. And, you know, we went round and round. And I remind her I'm a master sergeant, you know, I ranked her like by 3 stripes, but she wouldn't have none of it, you know, and complain up and down the chain of command that, you know, it's wrong, it's so cruel to do that, because her whole life, you know, as an illustrator, was basically, you know, pretty much insulated, you know. She didn't have to do anything but show up at an office and work on a computer. And so this whole being a soldier thing was like way outside of her realm, right? Because she really wasn't a soldier per se. And so anyway, that was, you know, those were the kind of issues I had to deal with all the time. So then I got lectured on, well, you know, maybe we can come up with a better solution, you know, rather than make them do push-ups. I'm like, what else am I going to do with this guy? I said, okay, I'll make him go home this weekend. I'm going to make him write a 20-page essay on accountability and responsibility, right? So that's what I did. I made him spend his whole weekend writing essays, right? And I thought, man, this is stuff that I would make my kids do, you know? Not a soldier, but it got to that level for me, and I just threw my hands up, said, I'm out of here, you know? And went on to do my thing in corporate America and learned some hard lessons out there. You know, again, as I mentioned earlier in the program, they just don't move. They move like pond water. You know, they're just not as fast as the military, and the work ethic's not there. I ended up working for a glass company for a minute, for about 4 months, as a superintendent, and it was like, I can't even describe it, because I worked in an industrial park. They hired all the local civilians to run this plant, which is 350 people around the clock. You know, a shift work, and it was like herding cats every day. You know, asking a guy to take the trash out in the office that he helped fill up with garbage was like asking him to cut off an arm, right? It's like, are you kidding me? You know, I mean, it was insane. I mean, there was no discipline, no responsibility. You know, it was like, I'm not doing anything. I don't have to do anything extra, right? I'm not going to do anything other than my job. You know, exactly this. Damn, you know. And then I learned that I had very little power in corporate America, you know, because all the rules, you know, that come down, you know, OSHA and everything else, you know, you know, the unions, you know, it's like, wow, you know, and this is how, when we guys are being kind of successful, yeah, you're successful, but I can make it 1,000 times more successful if we just got rid of all the nonsense and apply the military mindset to business, you know. We freaking be knocking it out of the park, you know. It's kind of weird, but it was an adjustment. And I always tell my you know, other soldiers that are getting out from the military is you got to become a chameleon. You got to learn to adapt. You got to learn how to blend in. You're still the chameleon, just change colors a little bit so you can fit in, right? You don't get eaten up by everybody else. And if you can do that, you can adapt, apply your military mindset, the skills that you learn in the military to what you're doing. You know, you'll do okay. And so, you know, there is an adaptation to this whole thing, and a lot of guys, a lot of veterans have a hard time making that adjustment, and so they don't go far, or they have a lot of problems. And I say they have a lot of problems. It's a lot of, you know, a lot of headbutting, you know, with their peers and their supervisors in these corporations, because we don't think alike. You know, we just don't think alike. In fact, think of it like this: most of the guys that come out of the military, even if they weren't a leader in the military, they still have leadership traits because they've learned them just through the military alone. They've learned basic leadership traits. And when you go to corporate America, most American corporate, you know, people at the corporate level, they call themselves leaders, but they're not. They're managers. Okay, they don't even understand the difference between what is a leader and what is a manager. Okay, a manager is not a leader.
That's
okay?
right.
A leader can lead and manage, but a manager, if you're a pure manager, good luck with being a leader. Well, you know, it'll be obvious right away you're not. You know, and usually a manager is a dictator. You know, a dictator. So, you know, and you know, and I've seen them. You know, they just have no clue, and they rule with iron hand. They rule by force. They rule by threats. Whereas the leadership motivates and inspires people to be their best at everything they do. So, you know, that's the advantage a lot of veterans have, and a lot of corporations do recognize that, and do like to hire veterans for that purpose. But a lot of guys just have a hard time assimilating with, you know, the corporate world, just because it's almost like a us and them mentality.
You know, I'm going to quote you again from the book, because I think this encapsulates like where that thinking is, and then having to put it into play in the civilian world. It's just, you know, I think emblematic of what you were just describing. So here's the quote. Who are these men? We are not average men, in speaking, of course, of Delta and the unit. Although many of us look like the guy next door, mowing grass and getting bitched out by the wife because we haven't taken the trash out yet, we all are not necessarily these super athletic looking guys that we often see in the movies. What makes us larger than life are our hearts, our minds, our belief in the American way of life, and our dedication to preserving it. We are motivated by the glory of combat. We're not afraid to fight and eagerly go to battle because we are empowered by righteousness, courage, training, and honor. Men like this are so rare that some selection processes have yielded only one candidate. These are the men the rest of the military try to model themselves after. They are tier one. And in the hierarchy of military society, they are on the pinnacle. So you've got this absolutely phenomenal group of warriors, and then you got to come back into civilian life and see what you've seen, and just how mediocre everything is, and how restricted and held back everyone is from, even if they want to be, even if they want to excel, even if they want to express themselves at the height of their aggression and power and superiority and their abilities, there's all of these traps, you know, that would cause them to fall and to fumble, not because they're not ambitious, but because the average and the mediocre are trying to hold them down. And what I'm wondering is, because I've met people who are not in the military who do think like this, who do believe in excellence and are willing to push themselves to the limits and believe in honor and the American way, and you know, and you know, the culture of what made this country great. I know people like that, even though they haven't served. They're far and few between these days. What I'm wondering is, what went into developing that ethos? How do you develop that ethos? Because given it's not being taught anymore, and given how what you've just described is even the military is getting watered down, you know, due to all of these cultural implications. You know, how do you cultivate this ethos in people going forward? What
Yeah.
was it that cultivated the ethos in you?
So, all right. So the unit doesn't cultivate that. Okay. That's why they have a selection process. They're looking for those that already have that, right? And so where does that come from? In my case, it was the way I was brought up. I was brought up in a military culture, the military mindset. I saw my father displayed what it meant to be a leader, you know, ethics, morals, all those things, right? What it meant to put on a uniform in the morning and make sure your boots are spit shine and your uniform is starched, you know, your hair is cut, discipline. Those things were already impressed upon me at a very early age, since I was a baby, right? And so, you know, now a lot of the guys that are Delta Force operators, their fathers weren't in the military. So where do they get theirs from? It's also innate. In my case, I believe it was innate. I was born with that, and I was also nurtured with that through my father, right? So nature and nurture. For some guys, it's just nature, and or for some guys, maybe their fathers and, you know, or mothers set that same example, even though they wasn't in the military, right? As you just said, you know, they also had this, you know, this pursuit of excellence, and they had these examples of excellence in maybe their father was, I don't know, maybe he was a baker, but he was an excellent baker, had that work ethos, right? And he pressed that on his kids. So you learn it from home. And I also believe you have it innately, right? Because I know a lot of good guys that went through that had good examples growing up that didn't make it because they didn't have what we call the heart, which is an interesting point. Because when you go through the selection process, if at any point you quit, you walk up to the cadre and say, "Sergeant, you know, I'd like to voluntarily withdraw." There's no harassment, there's no laughing, no giggling. So, "Roger that, Blue 22, put your bags in the back of that truck and get inside and wait." Right now, off you go. There's no fuss, no muss. And at the end, you get a little, you know, you got to go meet the commander. He's going to tell you, you know, "All right, man, you know, here's your paperwork. Thanks for coming." And a lot of times guys will say, you know, because now they're cleaned up, they had some food, a little bit of rest, took a shower, like, "I think I could do that again." "Hey, sir, you know, can I try again? Can I come back and try again? I think I can do it." And they'll answer it every time, unequivocally, without exception, is always no. You can have a change of mind, but you can't have a change of heart. Understand what that means? It means, yeah, you decided you couldn't do it, so you withdrew. You know, the truth is you didn't have the heart to complete it. And we're not looking for your mind as we're looking for a guy with heart. And so, you know, that's the kiss of death. If you quit, voluntarily withdraw at any point, you will never, ever get another chance, period. Because what they've done is they've analyzed and assessed your drive, your heart, your willingness to continue the mission under all circumstances, regardless of how hard it was, right? And so, remember I said earlier, when your body breaks down, then the mind breaks down. When the mind says, "I'm broke down, I quit," because my body's broke down, well, you're never going to go back. It's the guy that has a broken body that continues to move on because the mind's saying, "Get off your ass and keep moving." I don't care if you're broke. I've actually have a friend of mine that completed the course with 2 broken legs. 2 broken legs. Wow. Okay. Made it all the way through on 2 broken legs and got selected, but he didn't get to go to the unit for over a year because they sent him to a veterinarian in Texas to have steel rods implanted into his shin bones because he broke both shins to repair his legs. And then he came back after he had the implants inserted. So you know, that drive that they're looking for, it's a couple things. One, it's heart, right? They want a guy they know will never quit. You know, think about the movie Black Hawk Down. Randy Shugart, Gary Gordon, the Congressional Medal of Honor winners. Gary Gordon was on my team, you know, and I knew him, you know, those guys very well. And those guys knew what they were going to get into. They didn't have to go, but they had the heart to go into. They had the heart to go into, the mouth of madness and do what needed to be done, irrespective of their lives, right? And so that's what the unit's looking for. They're looking for that kind of man, and that is a rare thing to find. I've watched men quit in combat, I've seen men refuse to even go out the gate to go and to help their other fellow, Americans fight. It's courage. It's more than just courage. It's a belief system that's ingrained in many of us, or was ingrained in many of us growing up. And, it's there or it's not. And the unit, only thing the unit does is help cultivate it, and bring it even, polish it even more so, right? So we used to sit around, I remember, during lunchtime, in the chow hall. And I remember having one conversation with the guys one time. We said, man, this was pre 9/11. If we got out, and we started a company together, we'd be, indomitable, man. We could just own the world, man, because of our work ethic and our teamwork, And what's interesting is there's a lot of truth to that, because pre 9/11, I started a company called Global Security Consultants. I did very well. I actually hired other Delta operators. They didn't even know I was the owner of the company. But I actually I hired these guys, did very well. I sold my company to G4S in 2004. Triple Canopy was founded by a Delta Force operator. In fact, he modeled his company after mine. Triple Canopy was modeled after my company. There's a long story behind it. But look at Triple Canopy today. They're huge, right? So, and again, it's because that mindset. Here I am. I've never worked for anybody else since I got out of the military. In 19 years, I've always been self-employed, so to speak, right? I've worked for people as a contractor, but I was always my own boss. I made my own rules, decided when I wanted to work, how much I was going to get paid, et cetera, et cetera. And because I have that same mindset, I've traveled the world. I've lived in, worked in, or traveled to over 90 countries. I just, got a wild hair up my ass and came to Indonesia, and looked around and decided, you know what, I'm going to start a security company here, and when you put all that in perspective, Indonesia is 97% Muslim, okay? And by the way, Indonesian Muslims are not the same as Arabic Muslims, very different. I consider Muslims here in Indonesia much more liberal. Of course, there's an extremist element here too, but for the most part, they're very liberal. There's not these problems that you can imagine. So, but they have an aversion to the dogs, right? So,
right.
I'm not saying they don't like dogs, but most Muslims are cat people. Dogs, they're considered dirty. However, in Bali, they love dogs. So we call them Bali dogs. Bali dogs everywhere. They take good care of their dogs, and it's a big deal for them here. But I decided, I'm going to start a canine company here in a 97% Muslim country, and they're going to like it. And I'm going to hire Muslims to work my dogs. And that's what I did. I came in here, I was bold, I was audacious, but I had a mindset that anything's possible if I set my mind to it, because of the guy I am. And that's what I was taught in Delta. I was told, and it was beaten in our heads on a regular basis that there is nothing a Delta Force operator can't do and be good at, right? And I remember Colonel Garrison from Black Hawk Down, who was the unit commander at the time. He gave us, had a little speech for us, for my squadron, and he was talking about that very thing. He goes, what separates you guys from any other guy out there is that even though we don't have an artillery unit in Delta Force, if we were tasked to create an artillery unit and compete against the best artillery units in the military, he goes, we can do it, and we can be the champions. We can win. Why? We'll get all the equipment, we'll do all the training, we got the right guys for the job. And he says, ultimately, we will be number one. And there's a lot of truth to that, because there was a time when we competed internationally with other counterterrorist units, including the SEALs. And this competition was like an Olympics, right? Mm-hmm. The best counterterrorist units from around the world would come together, and it was an Olympics event, right? To see who had the best team, right? And it was a big deal in the unit because we had to try out for it. Not anybody could be on that team. It was a small team. And so, make a long story short, the unit always took the top 5 positions, whether it was shooting, anything to do with athletics. In fact, we outswam the SEALs every time. Wow. Outswam the SEALs, right? So that tells you something about the mindset of the organization and the men that are in it. Are they Jason Bourne? They're about as close to Jason Bourne as it gets, to be honest with you. But it also, remember what you said earlier on, we're the guys next door mowing the grass, getting bitched out by the wife because we take the trash out, right? we're just regular guys, with an extraordinary mission, and extraordinary responsibilities. And we take those because we are grounded in a belief system that, considers patriotism, the American way of life, freedom, protecting the oppressed, defending the oppressed, liberating the oppressed, doing the right thing, irrespective of all the bad that, is around us. And that's what sets us apart, and I live by that ethos to this day. I was not a Delta Force operator. I am still a Delta Force operator. I will always be a Delta Force operator. I will always be a Green Beret. My mindset, I wasn't a Green Beret just when I was a Green Beret, right? It wasn't a 9-to-5 job. You are a Green Beret all the time. Unfortunately, some guys are not. I am, and that's why I'm sitting here today in my office in Bali talking to you with my company and doing the things I do, looking the way I look, feeling the way I feel, and enjoying life because of that mindset.
Now that's very interesting because, and this is a good segue for a question I wanted to ask you, because there's also a downside for a lot of the guys that are operators, tier 1 operators at your level, that are running so hot, that are so, constantly going out on hits, constantly dealing with the extreme violence, and, ending up with PTS, for instance. Speaking of the Battle of Mogadishu, I just had Tom Satterley on the show, right? And, he has struggled tremendously with PTS. He said a lot of the things you said about the mindset and how he felt invincible. But when you take a fighter jet or a Ferrari, right, and you run it and all it's capable of, and then you have to take that incredible machine and put it back in civilian life and expect everything to be okay. It isn't for a lot of the guys. And I'm just wondering, is that something that you've seen? Have you experienced PTS? Is it something you see with a lot of your friends or colleagues from the past?
Yeah, I think PTSD affects everybody a little differently.
Okay.
And so I was diagnosed at one point with severe PTSD. And all right, but here's the difference, right? My PTSD it doesn't stem from combat and the horror of fighting and dying and I might get killed and oh my God. For me, that's not that way. My PTSD, and you're going to probably find this shocking. It's not what people are going to expect to hear from me, but my PTSD stems from something completely different. And it stems from this. You read the book. There's actually a chapter in there where I actually led a Delta unit. Even though I was in the unit, I led the Delta unit to a hit during the daytime. And there was a little boy on the street that actually was the son of the guy we were going after. And he wasn't on the road when I first came by. And when I came back, he was standing out there. He was only maybe 2 years old. And all of a sudden, we come screeching up. Everybody's jumping out with guns, and it's getting crazy. And this kid just loses his mind, man. He's screaming and all. He sees all these masked men with guns assaulting his house, right? And when I got out, all I could see was my 2-year-old son, right? That's all I could see, because when I saw him crying, I can still remember seeing my kid at 2 years old crying like that, right? Over something totally different, right? Mm-hmm. And I just felt the pain that he was, and the hurt. And it just really gripped me. And to the point where I didn't know what to do other than grab the kid and pick him up and try to hold him and comfort him with a rifle in one hand and the kid in the other hand, on the street. And it's those types of things, it's seeing dead kids, it's seeing dead women, it's seeing women and kids screaming for their lives as you're kicking in their doors, going in after the old man, it's those types of things. And I wrote it in the book, so, I killed a kid. It was an accident. I didn't mean to. He just, he was a victim of a circumstance. I was trying to defend my guys with booby traps and early warning systems because my guys were getting hammered all the time, every night by the Taliban. And so I had a kid walk through one of my booby traps and he killed him, a young kid, you know. And I didn't know that at the time because I was on leave. And when I came back, I was told that they found the boy's body in a dump. And they explained what had happened to him. You know, basically he ended up in a dump after he walked through my booby traps, blew him up. And then the father who sent him up there, because he was going up there collecting spent brass and unexploded ordnance, right? He was out there, you know, scrounging around, you know, scavenging for stuff to make some money. And he walked through my booby trap. And so the father then turned around and sent the second boy up there, his second son, and blew himself up. But he didn't get killed, but, you know, he was wounded. And when I came back and I heard all this, you know, that's a hard thing to deal with, right? Because, again, these were young boys, and I'm thinking about my son, and I'm thinking, man, you know, Dad was sending them up there to make money, you know, and this, now they're gone, you know. So, you know, those are things you got to internally, you have to, you know, you got to kind of resolve that, you know, and sometimes you never really can, and you're in this conflict there, you know. Do I go up and remove all the booby traps and expose my men, or do I leave them up there and risk another, you know, like, oh man, there's this, it's conflictual, you know. And so and it weighs on you. And I decided actually to go up and remove the booby traps. And of course, that was not a fun experience because the time that I was gone, that area that I had laid all the booby traps in had been bombarded by 155 howitzers on another attack. And so everything was in disarray, right? So when I got up there, I didn't recognize anything. And I literally had booby traps, you know, that were on a hair wire that I could easily trigger myself trying to disarm them, you know. But, you know, it's those types of things that caused me my PTSD, you know. When you think about that, you know, I had a friend of mine get killed on the set for Discovery Channel. I was doing filming a TV show.
In the book.
With yeah, exactly, you know. And, you know, those types of things, this wasn't even combat now. And he was killed in a helicopter crash. Actually, he died in my arms as a consequence of the helicopter crash. But, you know, those are the kind of things that make you go, wow, you know, guys endured all this other stuff and dies on a movie on a Hollywood set, you know. And, you know, it's like, you know, that's where my issue stemmed from, is trying to, you know, trying to resolve all that, you know, try to make sense of it all. And it can be very confusing sometimes because in that particular case, if you read the book, he and I had a lot in common. Both our wives at the time were Hispanic. We had the same number of kids, same ages. We were both Green Berets and Delta Force. We were both boxers. We trained together. You know, there's a lot of commonality there. And actually at the last minute, we changed seats. He took my seat on the helicopter and I took his position on the ground when it was supposed to be reversed. So I think of his death in a lot of ways like, man, that was supposed to be me. And so, you know, you have the survivor's guilt, you know, that you carry around all the time. And because now you got to face the family, which I did. You know, that's a whole nother story. But you know, that's where mine lies. But it does, you know, as far as combat goes, some of us are just natural born fighters. You know, I've always been a fighter. Growing up, I was a runt. I got in a lot of fights. I got bullied a lot. But I had strong parents. You know, they would not allow me to cut and run. In fact, they forced me to fight back. My dad would sit there and watch me get in a street fight and come out to drink a beer, you know, and they told me, you better kick his ass, son. If you don't kick his ass, don't come home. I'm gonna kick your ass. You know, that was the mindset from him and my mom, you know. And so they taught me to defend myself and fight for myself. They didn't teach me to be a bully, but they taught me to fight for myself. And so fighting came natural. I got very good at it. I got into martial arts. I boxed professionally. I was an MMA fighter. I actually like the art of war, and you know, I like it. It doesn't bother me, and you know, it's not. I'm not afraid of death. I'm not afraid of getting a firefight. I'm not afraid I might get killed or get hurt. I've already resolved all that. You know, I've resolved my death a long time ago, and you know, the only part I haven't been able to resolve is, you know, the pain and suffering and death of innocent people, particularly kids. You know, that's the hard one to come to grips with. And so, you know, people think that, you know, as a Green Beret or as a Delta Force operator, you're like this mindless savage, you know, this ruthless killer, you know, has no feelings. And actually, it's the opposite is true. That's why guys like Tom, you know, and others have these issues. It's because we actually do have a heart. And we do care for humanity, you know, and we are good people at our root. And, you know, it's like a pit bull. You know, pit bulls are some of the friendliest dogs in the world. They're always wagging their tail. They're so happy. But you put them in a fight and they're tenacious, right? They're unstoppable. But you get done with them, you break them up, and they're the happiest, luckiest, you know, the greatest dogs in the world. Kind of like human, like, you know, a Delta Force operator. And we do have a heart, and we do hurt, and you know, we do, you know, we do suffer, but we've learned to, you know, fight through all of that, you know, overcome all that and continue on with our life and continue on with our mission and do good things. So, you know, I've seen enough crap in my life that, you know, I should have been dead many times ago. And I've seen enough garbage in my life that it would make most people sick. But here I am, killing it in Bali, Indonesia.
There you are. And, you know, and then you're passing, and the thing is, you know, you have children and you're passing on a lot of these lessons to your children. You talk about it in the book, you know, helping usher in that ethos for them. And I'll quote you again from the book. You say, "My mother and father didn't teach me to be a coward, nor did I teach my kids to be so. I had many rules in my house, and none of them were negotiable. My kids were never allowed to say, 'I can't.' My wife and I never told our kids that they couldn't do something or that it was too much. I wanted my kids to remain above the social fray and look forward to becoming superhumans." I mean, that's, you know, that's a powerful thing to have a father like that. How have you mentored your kids?
Yeah. So I'm pretty proud of my kids. Actually, my two oldest ones, my daughter who's 35, she's also a business coach, does very well at it. And she's a self-made entrepreneur. She's a college graduate. She's an accomplished martial artist. I can go on all day long about her. Very, very proud of her. She's my business partner. She's also my business partner. How cool is that? I'm a business partner with my kids, right? So my son also has 2 college degrees, bachelor's degrees, and he's a Green Beret, just like his old man, right? He followed my footsteps. And I'm very proud of him. He's a super athlete. You know, I mean, he is a stud, super athlete, high IQ, very accomplished, and pretty good looking too. It came from this. And then, you know, and then my third daughter, my second daughter, she's 20. She actually just finished a technical school, and she does very well at that. She's a go-getter. Wouldn't expect anything less. She has a drive like all my other kids, right? My kids were all driven, and I enforced that in my family. I didn't allow them to be lazy or slackers. You know, I had rules. You get up in the morning, you make your bed. There's just some things I just didn't. It's like the military. Like I was taught in the military, and my dad taught me. It's like, you know, I passed that on to my kids. It's like, you know, there's going to be a little bit of regimentation in your life. You're going to have to learn a little bit of self-governance, self-leadership, you know. And so you're right. I told my kids, in fact, from the time they were everyone was able to understand, I told my children their mission in life, my mission in life first was to raise the bar very high. And I expected them to go over that bar, right? That was their mission, to be better than me. And I raised a really high bar. I don't know if they'll ever reach it. It's pretty high, right? So I told them, I said, your mission in life should be to be better than me at everything. And I said, your mission in life is also to raise your kids to be better than you, right? I said, that's how it should be. Every generation should be better than the last one. I said, and that's how one day Comstocks will rule the world. We will be the superhuman beings, right? That's the only way it'll happen. And so it's step by step by step, generation by generation by generation. I want us to raise winners, not losers. Okay? Yeah, I mean, we got families that are 5th generation welfare recipients. Okay? Mm-hmm. We're not having that in my family. Okay? We're going to be generations of generations of generations of high achievers. That's the mission. Guess what? And it's not because we were born into money, because we weren't born into money. Remember, my dad had 11th grade education. My mom had a 9th grade education. We were broke, all right? We were broke, you know. I didn't have no money. I made my money. My kids make their money. You're going to teach your kids to make their money, but they're going to also learn to be high achievers because money is not everything. You know, I don't use it as a metrics for success. I use life experiences and what you've achieved in life. That's the metrics for success, right? So, so I've always instilled that in my kids, you know, and you're right. You know, if my kids had an argument, my two oldest ones, I remember. It's like, okay, you guys want to fight it out? You got a problem with that? Let's go in the garage. Put the gloves on, put the gear on, let's get it on, work it out. And hey, might as well learn a lesson out of this. Might as well do some fighting and learn some skills too, right? And then when it's all done, you can shake hands, give each other a hug and a kiss, and you're back to being brother and sister again. I said, but at least you learn something, right? You learn how to fight while you're at it. So, you know, everything I did was to make my kid better. My kids never spent a day in daycare longer than they had to. If I got off of work early, I always picked them up. I don't care how many errands I had to run or what I had to do. They were going to run those errands with me, and we're going to ride together in the car. And while we're riding in the car, we're not going to, you know, at the time we really didn't have cell phones to mess around with. But, you know, we were going to basically sit in the car and twiddle our thumbs. We were going to have, it was going to be a moment of instruction. And Dad was going to teach you something about something. And I always told my kids, I don't know everything, but I know something about everything. You know, it might be that much, but I know something, you know, about it, even if I know just what it's called. And so I would take the opportunity to teach my kids something in the car about something, whether it was the universe or stars or what is the moon, you know, what are the 5 elements, you know, whatever it was, man, you know, English, whatever. I took that opportunity to teach my kids something. We didn't just have idle time, you know, and my, you know, you think, oh, how horrible is that? You always just teach the kids. Where's the leisure time? Man, we had leisure time all the time. We went camping. Okay. We did martial arts together. We trained martial arts together. We went fishing. You know, we had a great time together. But I always, when I saw an opportunity to make it a teachable moment, I made it. I made my kids better, better, and better. And so here's the irony, right? So I don't want to get political or anything like this, but my kids are mixed race. So my 3 oldest kids their mothers are black. Okay, African American, black. I don't call them African American because you're either American or you're not, right? So I'm German American. No, I'm just American. But so my kids' mothers are black. So I have mixed kids. I also have Asian kids. Okay, whose mothers are Asian. One of them is actually Hispanic and they're Asian. And so, and I'm adopting actually my Indonesian kids here. So, you know, I look at the world right now and they're all yelling, you know, white man is bad, he's the oppressor, you know, minorities beware, you know, blah, blah, blah. And I'm so sick of the world telling my kids they're being oppressed. They're being oppressed by guys with my skin tone, right? I really, really resent it because my kids are winners. And they're winners not because of my flesh tone. They're certainly not losers, okay? And they're not winners because of their flesh tone. They're winners because of the mindset. That's why they're winners. That's why I'm a winner. So, you know, people make all these excuses for their failures out there, you know, and they want to always, you know, project on someone else. It's their fault because I'm down. It's their fault because I can't get ahead. It's not my fault. It's the way my parents brought me up. You know, I was abused when I was a kid. Hey, man, grow up, take responsibility for yourself. You know what? If you're a Christian, at some point you have to put away your childish ways. It says in the Bible, right? That's usually around your teenage years. If you're not a Christian, you're an evolutionist, guess what? You better adapt to the world if you want to survive it. It's purely Darwinism, right? So either way, you're compelled to take responsibility for your life, and your success and failures are yours alone. You own them. I don't care what happened to you, okay? I could use the same daggone excuse. My dad had 11th grade education. My mom had a 9th grade education. I had to go to the Army, and I had to fight, you know, blah, 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 blah. And it was such a horrible experience, and I'm a failure. No, I took all those failures, man, to become who I am. And I always say, you know, I'm 90% of my mistakes, 90% of my failings, and 10% of my enthusiasm. That's who I am. And that's what allowed me to be successful because I never quit. I take accountability and responsibility for everything I do or don't do. And that's what I teach my kids. And you know what? My kids are superstars. That's it, because of mindset, parenting, you know, even mentorship. And to be honest with you, I've been divorced several times. That comes with the job. But I've always been a parent to my kids. I don't care where I'm at, especially now when you have FaceTime and, you know, and different types of, you know, mediums, video chat. I can stay connected with my kids. I do business with my daughter every day, my oldest daughter. I talk to my son all the time who's in special forces. I actually coach my 20-year-old daughter. We do coaching sessions together, you know. I get on there and I coach her just like I do all my clients. You know, I don't charge her, but, you know, I'm still actively involved and raising my 20-year-old daughter, making her a better person. So, you know, that's what parents do, man, or should do.
So, I mean, it's so refreshing to hear a parent talk like that about their expectations of their children being in their own hands, and it all being about having the right mindset. And you just mentioned something about coaching. So I wanted to ask, because, you know, again, as you say, you're a high achiever, and that's clear from your, you know, from your resume. Green Beret, Delta Force, MBA, PhD, professional boxer, MMA fighter, entrepreneur, successful business owner. You know, so you've got a lot going on. And obviously, mentoring kids who are also becoming great success stories. You coach clients. What do you coach clients on?
Okay, so I've been coaching for about 3 years now. My daughter's actually wanted to talk me into it. It's kind of funny. She called me one day. She's a coach for women entrepreneurs. She teaches them internet marketing. She does very, very well at it. Okay. And I was really impressed with that. And then one day she calls me. She goes, "Dad, you ought to be a coach, life coach, right?" And I thought, why? You know, because in my mind I was thinking Tony Robbins and Grant Cardone. Mm-hmm. She follows all these guys, right? And she's like, and then she actually used them as an example. She goes, "Dad," she goes, "I follow all these coaches out there, you know, because I'm always trying to learn. She goes, "But none of these guys have anything on you, absolutely zero." She goes, "They're all niche coaches. They're one-trick ponies, right?" And it took me a little while to kind of assimilate all that. But then when I started doing my research, I realized, yeah, there's a lot of truth to what she just said. For example, Tony Robbins, right? He'll tell you how to be successful, like in business and making money, blah, 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 how to be a millionaire, right? His metrics for success is based on money, okay? He makes a lot of money. Grant Cardone, you know, business, real estate, you know, how to make money, blah, blah, blah. It's always how to make money. All right, so these kind of guys, all right, and no disrespect, their metrics for life, for success, is how much money can you make, right? And I laugh at them. In fact, I was told that, you know, I'm not sure, don't know if it's true for sure or not. I was told Tony Robbins was originally mentored by a Green Beret. Whether it's true or not, I don't know. But I do know many life coaches out there, very, very wealthy life coaches, have never spent a day in the military, yet they've appropriated military culture into their warrior camps, or warrior mindset, right? It's like, they read a book, so I'm a warrior, right? So I look at these guys and I laugh at them because, yeah, you're making a lot of money, and you guys all lay in bed at night wondering what it's like to be Dale Comstock, because their money will never buy my experience. None of it. They can never do what I did, ever. I can make their money, but they cannot ever do what I did. And when I weigh it out, what's more valuable? My experience in life, my life experiences are much more valuable than all the millions of dollars they have. You couldn't buy it. And so my coaching program is centered on this. I want people to learn how to be good at everything they do, not just one thing, right? I don't want you to be just one thing good. In fact, if you listen to these other coaches, okay, they tell you don't quit, you know, don't give up. You know, they tell you certain things, but they don't tell you really how. I go into the science behind success. Success is science. It's based on physics, and physics alone, nothing else, not even philosophy. Physics. So I go into the science of success. Albert Einstein said it. He goes, if you want to be successful, get on success frequency. And he didn't mean repetition frequency. He meant frequency as an energy, electromagnetic energy, frequency, okay? And he says it. And not only does he says it, Nikola Tesla, many of these guys, these scientists are saying the same thing. It's all about energy. My success is based on purely energy. I didn't know that for a long time, but I suspected it. I was able to accomplish things by a certain kind of mindset. What I did not know was there's an energy frequency component to it that I was actually activating and didn't know it. I learned it, figured it out, and now that's what I use in my teaching. So I actually teach three, there's three components. There's actually four, but the three main components of my coaching is centered on, one, your body, right? So I've got a doctorate in natural health alternative medicine. I understand physical fitness. I was a professional athlete. I was a competitive bodybuilder, professional boxer. So I understand diet. I understand fitness, right? How's a Delta Force operator? The most fit human beings on the planet, right? So, what I understand is, you know, if you're Christian, again, your body's your temple. You're supposed to take care of it, right? But if you're not, if you're evolutionist, well, guess what? Evolution says you better take care of this body, because this is what's going to allow you to survive, to eat, thrive, and work. Either way, guess what? You're compelled to take care of this body. Most people don't, and they don't understand how to take care of their body. They wonder why they don't feel good, why they're sick, or they wonder why their attitude's wrong. Because there's a nexus between your body, the physicality of it, right? There's energy in this body that if it's not in balance, okay, nothing's in balance. So I dive deep on the physical fitness plan. In fact, most of my clients lose on average about 32 pounds in 8 weeks if they want to lose weight. I had one guy lose 44 pounds in 48 days. So I really go into that. I change people's lives physically so they can feel better about themselves, be more confident. And guess what? You have more longevity and you can do more things. You can enjoy life. I'm 57 years old. You see my muscles? But, you know, I live like a 20-year-old. I live like a 20-year-old. I've got a lot of injuries, but nothing that bothers me. I've broken my back. I've got fragmentation wounds. I've got concussions. Everything functions 100% like I was a 20-year-old kid. What a great feeling. But and then I go into mindset, right? I mentioned earlier about, you know, self-governance. You know, what I teach my kids. But there's a lot more to that, right? About thinking asymmetrically, way outside the box, challenging all the paradigms that you've ever been, you know, inculcated in, right? From childhood to your parents, to family, to culture, to media, you know, challenge all that, because most of it's bullshit, quite frankly. And unfortunately, a lot of people wait till later in life and realize that, oh, damn, I missed out on everything because I believe this crap, right? And so here you are. So what I try to do is get ahead of it. I try to teach you how to get ahead of the lies, the misinformation, right? All this tribal knowledge that was just made up around a campfire, okay? So I go into the mindset of it, which includes things like leadership, right? I talk about different types of mental constructs and tools for, you know, and I don't solve problems, by the way. Okay, there's no such thing as a problem. Everything's a challenge. It's perspective. I change perspective, all right? And when I change my perspective, my approach, my outcomes are different, all right? And not only is my outcomes different, but my approach feels a lot better than if I'm trying to solve a problem. So I go into those types of things. Then I go into another area that's like way out there, autogenic conditioning. You're like, what the hell is that, right? So I dive deep on that, and that includes a lot of different areas. It includes the metaphysical. It includes kinetic molecular theory, the laws of vibration, laws of attraction. There's so many aspects of autogenic conditioning, but it has to do with what I call spinal tuning, the nervous system, and creating, improving your performance literally overnight with a certain way of thinking, your performance, and then also changing your future, creating your reality by a certain way of thinking. So it's actually two pieces of this thing. And so we call it self-actualization. Actually, Abraham Maslow called it self-actualization. I teach you how to self-actualize. Live in your dream. I have self-actualized. I am one of 2% of the population. I have achieved everything I've ever set out to do. I am living the dream fulfilled. What I've always imagined I wanted, I'm doing it. You know, how cool is that? And am I done? Hell no. Because you know what? You have to keep setting, goals, right? Adding to that bucket list. So I keep doing that. And why do I keep adding to the bucket list? Because I'm like a shark. If I stop swimming, I drown, right? So I got to keep moving, right? That's what keeps me healthy and young. It keeps me invigorated. You know, makes life awesome. Is I keep filling the bucket list, man, you know, with more stuff to do. I just started another company, Tier 1 Performance Coaching with Joe Tedai from Dual Survival.
Right.
He's my business partner. And, you know, we just started this company 6 months ago. We're doing pretty well at it. And with the same objectives, right? Try to reach out to more people. And we actually want to compete with these other niche coaches, these guys that have appropriated military culture to make millions of dollars off of people selling snake oil. Because we're going to actually teach you how to be successful, not talk about it. You know, we're going to actually go into the physiology, the psychology, right? We're going to go into the physics of it all on how to be a better person. And we can do that because we've actually done it. That's the difference. Look at our resumes. Look at my resume. Look at Joe's resume. Wait till you see that one. Holy cow. You know, it's because we've actually done it. We can teach you more. It's plain and simple. That's what we do. That's what I do.
Amazing. Dale, absolutely amazing. I mean, I got to tell you, just speaking to you, it's, you know, you can feel the passion, you feel the energy. You know, you're a tremendous inspiration, not just because you talk the talk, but because you've walked the walk, as you said. And I want to be respectful of your time. There are so many other questions I have for you, and especially about autogenic conditioning, which I hope you'll come on the show again to kind of talk
Absolutely.
through some of these ideas. But where can our listeners find you on social media, your website, and if they're interested in your coaching, where can they find you?
Okay, so my website, Joe Ted and I are the two co-owners on that, is www.tier number one, performancecoaching.com, tier1performancecoaching.com. We're on Facebook. We've got a Facebook page as well. So you can find us on either one of those platforms. Very easy to get a hold of. Of course, I've got my own personal Facebook pages, sites, but not hard to find. But I would recommend tier1performancecoaching.com. It's probably going to be the fastest way to get to us.
I also highly recommend that our listeners buy your book, American Badass. It's a fantastic book. You go into a lot of these principles and about your life and about your accomplishments in that book. It's a great read. And I just want to say thanks again for doing the show, Dale. Thank you for your service. Thank you for your service. It's an honor and a privilege to have you on the show.
Thank you, Lawrence. Appreciate it. Anytime, brother.
Thank you.